We're good.
Okay.
All right, so what was the name of your presentation today?
So today here at the conference for District 57, I did a presentation on effective stage anchoring, or how to make sure that your audience remembers things more effectively by the way you manage the stage, and you basically plant the right seeds in their mind so they remember things correctly.
What are some of the biggest, I'm going to say, mistakes?
So when one of the things that I want to make sure that people are clear on is that you can do stage anchoring correctly, or you can do stage anchoring really, really badly. The idea is that you're planting seeds, and people try to do that often, but then they forget where they actually made the statements each time, so they end up muddying everything by, there was this great example of somebody had given a talk about, it was talking about like the life of their family, and there was a moment when they were talking about a funeral, and they had said like, here is the casket. And then later on in the same talk, that's where they laid down the picnic for a lovely afternoon, and not realizing that the picnic and the casket were actually physically in the same space on stage. And so you've got to be really aware, if you're going to do this, where you have anchored things, so that you don't run into that problem of cross-contaminating your anchoring.
I know that you've had training in lots of different areas for, say, the novice speaker. Where do you feel that they should start, and then where should they progress to get the additional training they need?
Yeah, the easiest thing to do, the best way to start is whenever you're writing out your speech, odds are you're going to be doing it in a way that's got some form of an outline first. So you're very clear what your main points are. And so once you've done that, figure out and make a map on a stage. I even did this for myself, and I've been doing this for a year. On the podium, I had a piece of paper that said, here's where I'm going to anchor this part of my timeline, or here's where I'm going to anchor this thing. So I knew, so I could continue to refer back, because if you try to remember it, you're going to run into problems. So make sure you know what your main points are, which is going to make your speech better, as well as being able to deliver it better. And then make sure that when you are anchoring, you know exactly where you are anchoring it by planning it out ahead of time. That's usually the best. There's a lot of education and things that you can do to learn how to do this at a much higher level. But I would say for your average person, just get used to being clear on what your points are and taking the time to plan ahead where you're going to anchor those points.
Well, now let me ask you a question, and this is, if it's too involved, whatever, but I personally would love to hear the answer to this one,
Sure.
Which is, I think of especially new Toastmasters. They write out their speech, and they'll have their notes on a lectern, and it's their written speech. So if they get lost or something, they look down and they look on their written speech to see what to continue on to say. What I think I'm hearing you say is that you don't actually put your speech on that lectern. You put a diagram of where you're moving and the points that you're going to be talking at each of those. Actually,
I have both. So what I did, so an example, at the beginning of the speech, I did a timeline of my history.
Is there some way to put my question
Yeah.
in your answer?
So one of the things to keep in mind is, how do you know that you're going to be anchoring things and distribute, one of the things to keep in mind is to make sure that you know what you're going to say in your speech and how it's going to show up within the stage if you're going to become stage anchoring intentionally. So the way I do that is I have my list, my notes of what I'm going to say in the speech, and I also have a little map of the stage, and I have trigger points in my speech. So point A that I want to teach has an A on the map of the stage. So when I'm getting there, it reminds me, oh, I'm going to say this, I have to move to this part of the stage. So I visually have a representation, and I have a trigger inside my notes to remind me to use that visual location. So it's not a map, I don't just speak off of the map or my notes, I have both sitting in front of me, so I know when I see that trigger in my notes that says this is main point A, I know to go to main point A on my map, so that it's very easy and I don't get myself confused. And I always make sure that the map is drawn out from the stage perspective, so I will always draw in where the audience is, so I also don't get confused which side of the stage I'm supposed to be speaking through, so that I have the stage, then I have the audience, and I know so that when I'm standing on the stage, I'm looking at the audience and I know where to go.
Interesting. Okay. I'm trying to think of, all right, one of the things I enjoyed about your presentation was how you involved the audience. And could you just speak a couple additional words on how does a new Toastmaster get comfortable with getting audience participation?
So I have to say, one of the things I was most nervous about in delivering this speech is that I knew I was going to be using things called accelerated learning techniques. The raising my hand and getting the audience to respond, call back and forth calls with the audience to get them to respond to me. And I was worried because I've never done that with a Toastmasters audience, and I didn't know if they would respond. And what I realized, and I kind of already knew, is that it's a natural thing for people to act that way. So the way I wouldn't try to throw in insane amounts of these accelerated learning techniques. The key is always to give them questions they know the answers to. So I always start my speeches with 3 simple questions that get people in the mindset of saying yes. How many of you want to learn this? How many of you want to learn this? In this speech, I actually started with the 3rd question was a no question, but I did that intentionally to set the stage that you guys don't know what I'm about to teach you, so it gave me more authority, because it was a new audience. Nobody in the room knew me. A lot of times I'll be presenting in front of a group that knows me, and I'll give them 3 yeses, so they're in that mindset of saying yes and in a positive mindset with me. So that could be the easiest place to start, is starting out with those questions where you're asking the audience something they're gonna know. It's a very simple way to do it. And also throughout the thing, especially if you're doing stage anchoring and having people, you've anchored things, make the audience state that they know what you've just anchored. Is this the auditor? What is this? Get them to respond. And also, if you can, give them the answer when you're doing the call and response with them. Like I was asking them how many types of learning, and there were 3. So I'd raise my hand up and put up 3 fingers so people knew, oh, so I'm giving them the answer. They're going to get it right. But it's also, the key here is to not kind of wimpily do it. You got to put your arm straight up so that you can, because that's the key. If you don't, if you have the enthusiasm, they're going to want to respond back to you. And not everybody is, but if you even do, starting out with those 3 questions where they have to say yes, because they're simple, easy questions they're going to say yes to, gets them in that mindset of, oh yeah. So instead of just asking a question at the start of your speech, ask a question deliberately. How many of you, so they know you're actually asking them the question, it's not just a question.
Okay, let's say it's after lunch, after dinner, it's just not necessarily conducive to learning. How do you still encourage a response? Or do you have some way that, for example, if you asked a question and you got like maybe 2 people to raise their hand, do you have a way to then come back and like...
Yeah. So one of the things that can often happen when you're doing this is, depending where you're at inside a conference or something, sometimes you'll be up after food. And so all the blood's rushed to their stomach and they're lethargic, which happens after people eat, and that's normal. One of the best ways to do that, first of all, if this is something that they've already experienced and you're doing an all-day presentation, the easy thing is if you've anchored it early on and people know that you're going to be expecting call and response, you want to start from the beginning with that, because then it's going to get everybody doing that consistently from there on. If it's your first time speaking and it's kind of a lethargic audience, I learned this when I was in university as a professor. I'm very good with the awkward silence. So I'm perfectly happy to say, how many of you are looking to, and put my hand up, and if they don't raise their hand, I'll be like, let's try this again. Now, how many of you, and you do it up to 2-3 times until you even get a sprinkling of people reacting, because then they get, oh, and it feels good for the audience because now they're part of the presentation instead of some passive thing being talked at. You're communicating with them. So you almost have to teach them to do it, but once they're into it and doing it, it seems natural and it's comfortable for them. But it's perfectly okay to ask the same question 3 times and kind of like, all right, guys, I know you just, and make fun of it. I know you all just ate. I know the food's in your belly. You got no brain. You got no blood anywhere except in your stomach where it's digesting. But I'm going to help that digest better by getting you guys moving around a little bit. Is that okay? And you always ask permission. People are going to say, okay. And then, so when I ask you a question, if I raise my hand, I want you guys to respond and teach them how to do it so it's not awkward and it's comfortable, and give them easy things. How many of you just finished lunch? Okay, great. Like things you know they're going to be able to answer, and it gets them in that habit, so when you ask them the other questions, they're already in that habit.
Well, and in fact, I just noticed that when you know how many you just eat whatever, and then your response was, great. So do you find that giving, especially if it's kind of a tough audience or a slow to respond audience, giving them that positive reinforcement you know,
So one of the big things also with all of this accelerated learning technique that I've been talking about is the fact that one of the greatest motivating factors for people is appreciation. So anytime somebody either asks a question or raises their hand in response, you've got to thank them. You've got to be able to recognize them and appreciate their participation in your talk. So if you ask a question, how many of you thank you? You always end with a thank you or that's great, something that gets them realizing that you appreciate that they're putting some effort into this talk. If you just say, how many of you, and then I almost can't do it. I almost said great. Like it becomes natural the more you do this, and it's gonna make the audience appreciate that not only are you asking them to do something, you're glad that they're participating and you're appreciative of it.
okay. Do you have anything else you would care to add?
So the last thing I want to make sure everybody knows is you don't have to learn all of this right away. Start with just trying with one question at the beginning of your talk with your hand up and getting the audience to respond. Especially in the world of Toastmasters, you're in a safe environment. They want to support you. They want to help you. They may not be used to responding, but it could really change the dynamic of your group. And everybody starts getting it, and you get much more interactive talks, and it raises the energy of your group if you get greater interaction. So that's the one thing. And don't feel like you have to implement everything. What you want to do is choose one thing, and it might just be stage anchoring. Your next talk, you decide, I've got 3 points, I'm going to try to anchor those. It might be the call and response, getting people to respond. It might be putting the hand up to get a response. Like, first you might just ask the question and forget to put your hand up. That's great, you asked a question. Then you get to the hand, and the hand starts here. Then you go here. And there's a progression in the learning. I mean, for a long time I did this until my coaches are like, well, you're 80% committed, so I'm 80% committed to working with you. When I do this with a big, strong, straight arm, then people are like, oh my gosh, he's really into this. He's giving me 100%. I'm going to give him 100% back as an audience or a participant member. So don't feel like you have to implement all of this. Choose one, learn to do it well, and I recommend stage anchoring is probably the safest. Then learn to start with the one question. Then learn to start with 3 positive questions. Then learn to go, and you start to bring all these pieces together. Everything I included in my talk wasn't something I learned. It was something I started with one, got good at it, brought a second one in on top of the one I've been doing, and so on and so forth, and multiplied and grew on that until I can make a seamless presentation that has a lot of these pieces to the point where it becomes second nature. It's hard for me to do a talk where I'm not doing call and response, not anchoring the stage, whatever it is, but you start with one, get good at it, then you bring in the second one, then you bring in the third, but you don't have to learn how to make it all happen at once. Just get good at one. It's going to put you far ahead of most people. And then when you're comfortable with that, you can bring in a second and a third. And when you're doing your speeches, go to your evaluator before you start your talk and say, I'm going to be trying to implement this new piece. I know the book says to kind of assess me and evaluate me on these items. Can you also look for this one piece? I'm trying to bring in call and response. Can you evaluate if I did that well? And if they don't know what it is, you can explain it to them, that kind of stuff. But choose that one thing and make sure you're getting feedback on it so you know how you can do it better. For the talk I just did, for this talk, I've had it filmed, and I'm going to review it. I'm going to review it with my coaches, and we're going to look at what I did well and what I didn't well, because I can consistently improve as well. And I might be looking at different things that you might be, but just start with one. That's it. Get good at it, then you can bring in others.